This week, we are once again visiting a few more stories about Dokkaebi, the Korean goblin. I already introduced Dokkaebi in my episode 47. If you missed it, I recommend you to check it out first. The link's in the description and at the corner of the screen. In short, Dokkaebi is a traditional mythical creature, which is somewhat akin to goblin or troll. It's not a ghost in the sense they are not from human spirit. Most common explanation is they are born from various objects people have handled over a long period of time, such as an old broomstick or a mortar. Korean shamanism assume every creature in the world, even a lifeless object, could take on its own spiritual character, and Dokkaebi is an example of that concept. There are still lots of debate as how a dokkaebi should look. For a time, colorful skin, a horn or two, and animal skin clothes were a typical way to describe a dokkaebi. But for the past decades, it's been largely dismissed as an influence from that of Japanese monster Oni. Current understanding is a dokkaebi usually manifests as a big, burly, hairy man. In truth, though, dokkaebi can appear as many different things, man, woman, old and young, or, as you'd see from some of today's stories, as a mystery ball of fire. Now, the floating ball of fire phenomenon is not unique in Korea. It seems to be particularly prevalent in the UK for some reason, and is known in various names region to region, such as will-o'-wisp, jack-o'-lantern, and ignis fatuus. In Korea, we understand it as an incarnation of dokkaebi, and call such a ball of fire as dokkaebi 불, literally dokkaebi fire. Dokkaebis are man-child, nasty pranksters, and love to have a fun, but they also like people, hate blood, and don't forget to pay back when somebody treats them kindly, using their magical power. So, among many paranormal and mythical creatures in Korean tradition, dokkaebi have the most endearing place in people's mind, and often appear in various kids' tales and pop cultures. So, here are 6 allegedly true stories from Korea about dokkaebi. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by your host, Anthony. My mom spent her childhood in a countryside. I think she was a bit of tomboy. Mountains, fields, and streams, the wild nature was her playground, and once out playing with other village kids, she forgot time and didn't come back home into night, resulting in her mother biting her lips with frustration every evening. One day she was once again out on the field with her friends into dusk, and she saw some weird balls of light floating about the foot of the mountain. Wondering what that could be, she called for other kids' attention. Their eyes all followed where Mom's finger was pointing, and all fell silent, just watching. Perhaps less than a minute passed. The strange light went off, leaving a silhouette of a person on the spot. Mom panicked and collapsed down while other kids screamed and ran away. Mom too wanted to run away, but her body was frozen stuck, and so was her mouth. The man whom my mom believed to be a dokkaebi seemed looking around here and there, and then jumped towards Mom in the speed impossible for a human, while Mom could still barely wiggle herself backwards on the ground. Fortunately, an older boy from the gang dragged and picked her up and ran away together. Mom was so traumatized and was bedridden for a few days afterwards. It goes without saying it put an end to her playing around into late evenings. Mom would still often recount how the dokkaebi ran towards her, how the big giant figure jumped and heaved up and down like an ape. My father's from a small island in Tongyang City at the southern end of the nation. It's what his grand aunt experienced when Dad was still a little boy. I would address her as Granny here for the sake of the story. The time was a day before Chuseok holiday. Granny came out to Tongyang town to shop for all the things necessary for festive food and memorial ritual. The shopping took longer than she expected, and she missed her bus. One thing led to the other, and by the time she managed to walk to the port, the last boat back to her island had already departed too. It was of course long before mobile phones, and she didn't know what to do or where to turn to. There was lots to prepare for the big holiday, and she could not go back home that evening. In the end, she decided to just walk across the sea. What, you might say? But the island is just a few hundred meters away from the mainland, and at the lowest tide in the right season, the sea got shallow enough to walk across. But of course, it's nothing like walking on the pavement. There were rocks, muddy pits, and potholes, and once the tide turns back in, it can become as deep as 10 meters at certain spots. It goes without saying the risk was infinitely higher after dark. But the weight of duty as the wife in charge of the big family gathering was still bigger. So, she was climbing down the coast with a heavy bundle of shopping in her hand, when somebody called her.
"Hey, ma'am, are you trying to cross the sea?"
When Granny turned to look, there was a big, burly man. "Well, it's Chuseok tomorrow, you know. I missed the boat while shopping, but I must be back home if I'm to prepare everything for tomorrow," Granny said.
"Okay. Well, then let me carry you across on my back,"
the man said, and indeed carried Granny on his broad back. To break the sense of embarrassment, Granny tried to chat him up, but he didn't reply much. And anyway, before she could say much, they already arrived the island. Granny was so grateful and gave the man some of the rice cake she bought earlier as a token of thanks. Man graciously accepted it and disappeared to the dark sea again. There were still tons to do at home, and Granny hurried back. It was only the following day, when the relatives gathered for Chuseok pointed it out, that Granny realized how odd the previous night's encounter was. First, how quickly the man managed to walk across those few hundred meters. Even for a strong young man, to walk across the rocky seabed with a woman and a bundle on his back wouldn't have been an easy task. Yet the man just walked on without a care. Second, Granny was completely dry even after the crossing. Even at the lowest tide, there are various puddles and potholes, and especially with all the waves, it was impossible that she could cross the route completely dry. And according to the relatives who lived around the port on the mainland side, there was no such a man by Granny's description. In the end, Granny concluded that the man must have been a dokkaebi, and her unbelievable story became the talk of the island for a while. My dad grew up in a small village that sits in the valley between two mountains. It's not far from bigger towns, but the village itself does give off very isolated feel. The story goes back to when he was a kid. One muggy summer night, he and his two friends decided to sneak into the watermelon field to steal one melon as their night snack. As they quietly walked over the hill to the field, Dad saw a strange man next to a rice field. He was wearing a straw poncho and sitting so slouched down that Dad could not see the face despite the bright full moon light. What really alarmed Dad was the smell. The man stunk sort of gamey as if from a wild beast, and his legs, revealed under his shortish trousers, were covered with fur too. Dad didn't assume anything too outworldly despite of it all. He just thought he might be an owner of the farming field, standing on night watch for sneaky thieves like he and his friends. As soon as they walked past the man's earshot, Dad told his friends that they'd better give up and go back, as there's the man watching. But his friends seemed confused. Man? What man? Clearly they didn't see the Stinky Man. They went back to the spot where the man was sitting just a moment ago, but he wasn't there anymore. But that wasn't the end. Season changed and it was now winter. With more free time in hand, village adults spent long winter evenings with rice wine and card games. One evening they ran out of drinks and sent my dad and his friend off on an errand to fetch some more bottles. And on the way back from the shop, two friends witnessed something bizarre. Almost at the same spot where the dad saw the strange man in last summer, appeared a strange ball of floating fire. Both of them sensed the fireball was gazing at them intensely, and they ran. But the fire now followed them, constantly changing its shape to 3 balls and then 2 and then 4 balls of fire. Panicked boys jumped into the furrow nearby and kept hiding till the weird fireball finally moved away. Dad believes on both occasions he encountered a dokkaebi. And I do believe him, because I too witnessed that weird fireball there when I was a kid. My mom's mother became a shaman in her later years. Of course, she had lots of amusing stories to tell me when I was young. And some of the most interesting ones were about dokkaebi. According to her, dokkaebi was a common feature in countryside. Unlike other common ghosts that often favor and thrive in the hustle and bustle of big towns, dokkaebi seem to prefer where air is fresh and water is clean. Anyway, my mom's family was one of the best off households in the village, and her father, my grandpa, firmly believed it was all thanks to dokkaebi. One year, back in the 60s, they had a severe summer drought. Plentiful of water is essential in rice farming, but that summer, farming fields were all parched and cracked everywhere. Everybody sighed and worried if there would be anything to harvest. One night, Grandpa was on his way back home across the parched, dusty field. Somebody called him out of nowhere.
Hello, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee.
Grandpa was familiar with dokkaebi and knew they were harmless as long as one treated them friendly. So he answered to the call. Who is this?
Mr. Lee, I'm starving. Give me something to eat. Something to eat.
The voice said. I don't have anything on me at the moment. But what do you want? Grandpa said.
It's not just for me. Could you give us some boiled beans?
So Grandpa boiled a bowl full of beans as soon as he went back home and brought it out to the field. "Hello! I brought you the boiled beans as you asked. Help yourself," Grandpa said to the empty space. And then, in the pitch dark, he could not see anything but could feel and hear fast wind brushing and rushing around him from all directions. After the gusts of wind died down, Grandpa checked the bowl, and it was still full of beans. He wondered, but anyway brought it back home. Only when he checked the bowl under the light, he was surprised to find all the germs of beans gone. A few days later, Grandpa was on the way back home through the usual way. Once again, a voice called him from the dark.
"Mr. Lee, Mr. Lee, thank you, thank you."
"You're welcome. Let me know when you are hungry again," Grandpa said. Then multiple voices said in turn like a sing-around.
"Mr. Lee, do you want water in your rice field? Shall we help you, Mr. Lee?
Do you want water in your rice field? Shall we help you, Mr. Lee?
Shall we help you, Mr. Lee? Grandpa was unsure, but thought he had nothing to lose, so he accepted the offer and showed where his field was. Next morning, he went out to his farming field as usual, and his rice patch was indeed full of water. Rice plants that had been withered revived back too, while neighboring fields that belonged to other villagers were still parched. And it wasn't just that year either. Regardless it was a dry or wet summer, Grandpa's rice patch kept always the ideal water level. It yielded naturally plentiful of high-quality produce, and his rice would be sold out with a premium year by year. All the while, Grandpa became friends with the dokkaebis, and it became a routine to make small talks in the field at night. Occasionally, his household would wake up with a loud thud right before the dawn to find sometimes a deer that was freshly hunted, other times still alive big fish thrown in his courtyard. Nobody could be sure whom such gifts were from, but Grandpa thought they were dokkaebi. With all those helps, his family got gradually better and better off. My mom remembers how her father would still occasionally go out to the field all by himself at night. So, I should think it should be true, to a degree. It's a story my dad's friend told us over a drink, so make what you will. He is from a small countryside village. When he was little, his neighbor started going out every evening or even in the middle of the night. As usual in such a small community, people knew their neighbors' ins and outs intimately. There was nothing going on in the village, especially at night. No pub or cafe anywhere nearby, and even the only corner shop in the village would close well before dinner time. One day, his dad asked his neighbor, "I see you go somewhere every evening these days. You are not working in the field at the time of the day, are you?"
No, I just made a new friend. I meet him in the evening to share a drink and chit-chat,"
the neighbor said, which was still odd. In that small village where everybody knew everybody, what new friend did he make? And where could they go in the middle of the night? The nearest pub was in town, good 20 minutes ride away, and the neighbor didn't even have a car. Not long after the conversation, they noticed the neighbor starting his day later and later. As with any farmers, he too used to be out in the field at the crack of dawn in the busy summer season. But now he would be hardly seen before midday, and even then looked visibly tired. It all added to the mystery, and one late evening when his dad saw the neighbor heading to the direction of the nearby mountain, he decided to follow. Where the neighbor stopped was a tomb in the mountain. He then took out a bottle and started chatting away as if there was somebody else.
Oi, mate, have another sip. Cheers, cheers. Oh, leave some for me.
The lively, friendly tone was like he was talking to a very close body. Baffled Dad called out, "Hey, neighbor! What are you doing?" But the neighbor nonchalantly replied,
Oh, it's you. I'm just having a drink with my friend. Come, join us.
"But there's nobody else. It's just us two here," Dad yelled.
Oh, what are you talking about? He's right here. Hey, say hello to my neighbor. Where's he gone?
The neighbor seemed to finally realize there wasn't anybody. Dad helped baffled neighbor back home. Soon this weird story went around the village, and most village adults agreed that the neighbor was tricked by a dokkaebi. It might not have meant any harm, but dokkaebi's doing could unwittingly mess up the person's life, and always better to stay cautious, they would say. It's a story that runs in my mother's family as her great-grandmother experienced. I'll just address her as Granny here for the convenience. Granny lost her husband early. A young widow with kids would have had it hard any time, but it was particularly a heavy task to survive in her time, and especially with 8 young kids. They had to move around often to be able to find an affordable housing, and they ended up in a small cottage with a single room out in nowhere at the edge of the village. First night at the new place, 8 children fell asleep early after a long day. Far away from other houses, it was pitch dark all around the house. But before Granny fell asleep, somebody knocked on the door. A visitor at this hour? To this cottage out in nowhere? Few even knew they'd just moved here. "Who is this?" Granny asked in a low voice, quietly holding onto the doorknob fast. There was no answer, just another knock. There was nobody to turn for help, and she was the only one to keep her 8 kids safe. She quickly put the door latch on, and just in time, the knock and shaking of the door got louder. Some of her kids were woken up by the noise too, asking what was going on. Granny could not show them her fear, so she kept her calm and stayed up all night long, comforting her children and alert for the knock and noise from the door. Following morning, Granny visited the nearest neighbor and consulted about what happened the night before. The old neighbor commented that it might have been dokkaebi. At the time, people still believed in that kind of things, and Granny herself knew well enough that a house built on a dokkaebi's playground could bring a fortune to the occupier of the place. She was scared, but she couldn't find another so cheap a place, nor could she find a temporary refugee for herself and 8 kids. There was no other way than to stay put in the spirit of life or death. When the night fell, once again somebody knocked on the door. Granny was prepared this time. The door latch was on, and she was sitting right in front of the door. "Go away! Leave us alone! You can't scare us!" she yelled back firmly. That must have triggered whoever was on the other side of the door. Knock and pull on the door got violent, and all sorts of breaking and crushing noises rang from the outside. Granny was scared, but just stayed put with her eyes closed. Such ordeal continued and escalated night after night. Loud and gushing noises of things breaking, heavy footsteps, pulling and kicking on the door got more intense every day, but Granny yelled them back to go away. On the 7th night in the new place, Granny sensed ominous from the early evening. She put her kids to bed earlier than usual and prepared herself for another night. For once, it wasn't knocking and crushing noise, but gusts of wind like in the worst day of typhoon. The whole building shook and its flimsy windows and door creaked. Sound of pots crashing and trees falling made Granny shiver.
Get out! I'll crush you to bits otherwise! Get away from here at once!
A husky male voice roared from the outside. Well, that must be that damned Dokkaebi. Facing the tangible presence strangely boosted Granny's fighting spirit, and she also yelled back as fiercely as she could pull off. "We are going nowhere! It's our home! You go away!" Gusts rose even higher, and her kids cried, but whenever Dokkaebi threatened, Granny hit right back. She didn't know if she fainted or exhausted into sleep, but when Granny got around, it was already morning. And she remembered she had a dream. A broad burly man looked at her and bursted into laughter, saying,
What a tough cookie!
and walked away. Just like that, from the very day on, nothing disturbed her household at nights. And it seemed Granny got lucky since then on too. Whatever work she tried turned out a success, and she could manage to raise her 8 children without a problem. The luck continued in her children's life too, and her son, my grandpa, too became pretty successful. I saw some photos from his younger days, and remember I was impressed with him in his elegant white suit on his ox cart. Who could tell if what challenged Granny was really a Dokkaebi or not, but a nasty prankster with an ultimately warm heart seems to fit the usual bill of Dokkaebi as we know. I wonder if there isn't a Dokkaebi somewhere for me too? Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Dokkaebi is a common feature in folk tales, but I find it amusing they appear in modern accounts too, if told as happened in grandparents' generation. I guess modern urban lifestyle is not suitable for Dokkaebis. If you like Dokkaebi stories and should like to hear how they are depicted in folk tales, do let me know in the comment. I usually like stories told as true story, but Dokkaebi is an interesting character, and I could make an exception there. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a like and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel. Also, do check out my past episodes if you haven't yet, and share them with your fellow horror paranormal loving friends or anybody interested in Korean Asian cultures. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description. Buy Me a Coffee supporters get an early access to my new videos. Thank you. Until next Sunday, stay safe and take care.